One of the central pillars of any successful application of leadership is good communication. And so today I'll be talking with speaking coach John Henny. We'll be hearing about some of his tactics, tricks, tips, and similar words for how to get the most from your speaking voice. We're also going to hear some of his thoughts on leadership from his career so far. So it's a bit of a different topic to the last few episodes, but I hope that you'll enjoy it all the same. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
John, thank you very much for joining me this morning for you, this afternoon for me, from sunny, almost Los Angeles, I guess.
Yeah, almost, although it hasn't been sunny lately, but yes, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to have you here. I'm going to hand over to you for a little bit at the beginning to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell us a bit about what you do, your background, how you've ended up doing what you do, and what gets you out of bed in the morning, really.
Yeah, so what gets me out of bed in the morning is 5 bulldogs, but that's a whole nother tangent. But I've been a voice coach for over 30 years, and I kind of had a not straight path to this career. I started off as a drummer, didn't think I could sing, and just started voice lessons on a whim, and ended up studying with Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson's voice teacher, and then began to teach other teachers. I started teaching singers as well as other teachers, and then I found what makes a successful vocal performance as a singer, how they hold attention, emotionally connect with an audience in these devices. I realized also work for speakers, and that you can have a much more dynamic and compelling voice.
That's not the traditional career path, is it?
No, it's I call it more of a drunkard's walk. Yeah. And and I certainly, my dad is from Glasgow, Scotland.
Okay.
Both my parents actually had a very Scottish upbringing here in the States, but he was a very natural singer, and I was not. And as my first attempts would be, I would hear in the other room, "That's bloody terrible." So. Which was fine. That was my dad. I was used to it. So I thought, you know what, I'll play drums. And it was funny coming back to singing. It really is. It's an instrument that you can learn to control. And one of the things I really talk to people about is certainly since the advent of the recording industry, we kind of have decided that there are a class of people who sing and then the rest of us don't. And the fact is, as language evolved, they don't know if singing preceded actual spoken language, and they certainly developed together. And it's kind of our genetic birthright to sing. Singing, just having melody in the voice and rhythm and tone, all of these things are incredibly important for communication. And I tell people, every time you open your mouth, you are, in a sense, you're singing. You're using these vibrations of the voice to communicate.
It's interesting, isn't it? The kind of the career changes as well. I mean, you're in good company, aren't you? There's some pretty big names who initially were drummers and then became singers as well. I mean, Roger Taylor, Phil Collins, Dave Grohl, I suppose. Showing my music taste a bit there, perhaps.
Even Peter Gabriel.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Way early on was a drummer, and in the early days of Genesis would stomp on a bass drum at the front of the stage.
Returning to the kind of the speaking angle, then, what are some of the common challenges that speakers and leaders really face when they're trying to connect with that audience or the team they're leading, and how do you help them to overcome those challenges?
We tend to take our voice for granted, and we tend to not have a lot of awareness about it. And there was a study out of Yale University, and I believe it was only over 1,700 participants. And what they did is they wanted to measure how accurately the other person, the listener, could intuit or empathetically understand what the speaker was feeling. And what they did was they tried it a few different ways where they could see and hear the person. Then they could only see. So it was all body language. And then they removed the visual and you could only hear the other person. And it was there at the voice and the voice only where the accuracy went up. The voice is truly the emotional connector. And what influencers and leaders need to understand, and I think we already know this, but most decisions are emotional. And then we go back and we'll rationalize them. And when you are able to emotionally connect, you're going to have more influence over that person. And I prefer to see that used for good rather than ill, but I will only half joke that you rarely meet a cult leader or a con man without a great voice.
That's a depressing truth, I suspect.
It is. It is.
That does surprise me about the outcome of that study, though. I would have thought that, particularly if you're trying to read emotion, I would have thought the body language would be quite important. I'm quite surprised.
Yeah, and body language is important, right? But it tends to fall more into things of like, a roll of the eyes, a lift of the eyebrow. And that certainly gives across meaning. But the true emotion, we can really, what the person is feeling, that really is within the vibrations of the voice. And the way the voice works is just so remarkable. We don't fully understand it. You will find the greatest minds in voice science not in agreement. And there are areas of this instrument we still don't understand, and just that we take air molecules and we set them into vibration, and the way they vibrate and the way they hit our ears and the way we process this is so complex yet so primal that it really is incredibly important. And I think when you ask about what people miss, it's just kind of taking for granted. They're just, I need to explain something, or I need to rally the troops, if you were, but you don't really stop and think about, okay, how am I going to use my voice? And the other important component is, what are the emotional intentions I'm going to use? What are my true objectives? And when you put that into an emotional context, you can become highly effective.
Slight tangent on the subject of taking for granted not just the voice, but the ability to easily and readily communicate. Do you think post-COVID and in the move to virtual interaction, do you think the voice has become more important?
That's a fantastic question, because I believe that the voice has become more important because we don't have the energy of the person in the room. And so even talking about body language, certain nuances can be lost with a camera. And then psychologically, when we are with someone in a room, we will have a different energy and an inclusive energy. But when just staring at this camera, our energy will tend to be more diffuse. It'll drop. And what I encourage people to do is to really bring that camera into your energy and really speak to this camera as if it's someone who is there. And the voice almost needs to be turned up just a tiny notch when you don't have the person in the room. And going back to singers, they understand this. They were in their experience. And so they know, depending on the audience, the room, the material, they will approach a song differently each night and each performance. And certainly when they get into the recording studio, they know that it's different from a live performance. And so they need to bring a different approach and a different energy to the song, right? Because you don't get to see them jumping around and you don't get the huge sound system pounding. And so they need to be able to connect to these people. Now we just tend to wear these little earbuds, and we are often using music as just a background to whatever we're doing. So singers know that that voice and that performance is incredibly important to hold that attention.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess musicians generally and singers as well, they've always kind of been hybrid anyway, haven't they? And in the kind of the mindset piece and having to interact with people that they may never meet even, or probably haven't.
And think about it. And these performances, these great performances, because of recording technology, live for generations and generations and generations. And it's remarkable to me when you see young people, because there was music of my youth that I really enjoyed. And of course, there's music of today, but now there's such a rich catalog of music, and young kids will go back and discover the Beatles for the first time themselves. And these performances, and certainly these vocal performances, hold up. That was how I first became fascinated with the human voice. My dad had an old reel-to-reel recorder, and he had the Beatles Help album on reel-to-reel. And I just remember Paul McCartney's voice on the song The Night Before. I was just stunned I think I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. And it's such a strong memory, just how captivating his voice was.
Indeed. And again, going back to the taking for granted and the move to COVID, and then this idea with the voice. And I guess for me, from a leadership perspective, I very early on in COVID, I recognized the need there to be more intentional in the way that we communicate with people, because you couldn't anymore rely on the water cooler chat, the informal stuff you ever hear in the office anymore, all of that kind of thing. But actually, from talking to you, it's more than just when and how frequently you communicate. It's about how you communicate, but how you use your voice as well. So there's a whole added layer there. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. It's, again, if you look back to singers and all the devices they use, in popular music, we have repetition. We have repeated verses, repeated choruses. And if you listen deeply, you will hear great singers bring in different nuances and different approaches each time they come to the repeat, because they know they have to constantly reawaken attention. And when you learn some of these devices, when maybe the material's a little dry, you feel the attention start to slip, you can utilize these to constantly grab the attention. They're almost pattern interrupts, because the worst thing is you're on a Zoom meeting, so there's already a drop in human energy and connection. And then you get the speaker who speaks in very rote, predictable ways. And it's like listening to 3 blind mice on repeat. Your attention is going to be gone and you're going to be drifting. And then they'll say, so what do you think of that? And it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't heard anything of the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, particularly, as you say, with the dry subject matter. I think we've all been there. And they're on both sides of the mic as well, to be fair.
True, yeah. And you can make dry subject matter more compelling. If rather than just talking your way through slides, which is often just a slow, painful way to spend time. If you have an intention to teach, to inform, and now there's something where you have a goal, and this intention, if you really feel, no, I want to really teach this material, that is going to create a different emotional intensity within you, and then allowing that in the voice and allowing the voice to be more musical. I will tell clients, look, take this dry subject matter, go take a couple of slides, and you're going to play this game that I call the world's worst musical. And you're going to go somewhere where no one's going to hear you. And I want you to sing this material and just have fun with it. Be silly with it. So today I need to go over the sales figures, right? Just a really horrible musical theater show. And then as you're singing your little tune, just allow the music to stay in the voice and see if that can carry over, and maybe some of the melody and the pitch and the sense of legato and the flow. And you'll find suddenly, wait a minute, there's something extra here in my voice. It's actually more interesting to listen to. And if that's connected with this intention to really teach this material, I promise you, it's going to be received in a different way.
Okay, elephant in the room then, something that any speaker will be able to identify with is nervousness and stage fright. I think everyone who's ever had to speak, even to 2 or 3 people for the first time, will have been through that. So how do you address that issue? What do you do with speakers, with leaders who struggle with those kinds of challenges?
Yeah, there are a few factors at play. First of all, if you're going to speak to people and it's important, you should feel some heightened sense, a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of anxiety, and performers actually welcome that. They know that that's just the little bit of butterflies that are getting them ready to go out there and energize them. But that can certainly cross over into something that can be debilitating. And if it's at an extreme level, that may be a time to seek help from a mental health professional that can assist with that. However, I find, and when it strikes myself, when I feel that chatter start, I just realize that this is the ego. This is the self wanting to protect itself. Because many years ago, when we traveled in small groups, if you were ostracized from the group, that could mean death. And this old fear continues, even though in modern societies, it's really not valid. But it's there nonetheless. So when I feel that coming, I remind myself that it's not about me. And I also give the listeners permission to not like me. And I think that's very important because they have that right anyway. And then I say, but I am here for the people who need to hear what I have to say. And I push my attention outward because we constantly, our attention, our consciousness, if you will, can either pull inward and we can be consumed with thoughts. And then sometimes we'll just wake up and go, wow, it's a beautiful sunset. What a wonderful day. Wow, I'm really blessed in my life. And suddenly consciousness is outward focused. And the more you can work on having an outward focused consciousness and making it about other people, that fear will tend to subside.
Good to understand the reasons behind it, I guess, isn't it? And as with any challenge, once you understand the cause, it's easier to, if you can't actually stop it, you can at least work with it in the way that you described there. So yeah, really good. Like that. Again,
there's a saying, it's paraphrased from Robert Frost, I believe, but the only way around is through. And so you also need to put yourself in situations where you speak in front of other people. And it gets easier. It's something that you need to practice. And it's something that you need to do it.
Yes, indeed. Doesn't apply to mountains, though, I find. It's probably easy to go around those, but
Yes, that is true.
As a sort of speaker myself, podcast host, really, one thing that I do find personally when speaking, if I'm doing it for more than about half an hour on the trot, as it were, my voice gets tired. So when your voice is tired, what can you do about it?
There are a couple of things. First, when the voice is tired, you can work it in such a way to relieve the tension. What's happening is your vocal folds are opening and closing hundreds of times a second. And if they're not doing this in a very efficient way, they can quickly become tired, and they can also become a bit swollen from the coming together. And that will swell the tissue, which causes hoarseness, and we can feel that. One of the best things that they have found, voice researchers, is to take something like a straw. And they actually make voice straws. I have one here that's made out of metal. And what you do is you just make sound through it, much like you were playing, say, a kazoo. And you want a certain amount of resistance. If that feels too easy, you can just place your fingertips slightly over the top of it, or you can get thinner straws, like a cocktail straw, coffee stirrer. And you want to feel a little bit of that back pressure. And what that does is that back pressure acts as like a little massage for the vocal folds. And that energy can actually get them to realign in the right way. And so after you do some glides on that straw, maybe sing a little tune like Happy Birthday, then just say something with enthusiasm. Yes, that's right. And you'll feel, oh, there's where my voice is, and try and keep your voice there. But just doing that for a minute or so can be very helpful. The best way is to avoid the fatigue in the first place. And that often comes into your optimal speaking pitch. We tend to think of the voice as having more authority when we're speaking on a lower pitch. And that is true. Lower frequencies do give the voice a little more heft, a little more weight, but we will mistake pitch with resonance. For instance, if I'm going to speak on this pitch here, I can actually make my vocal tract very thin, very scrunched up, so it sounds rather thin and bright, or I can begin to make my vocal tract a little deeper. And so even though the pitch stayed the same, the perception was my voice was deeper. And so rather than taking the pitch that I'm on and dropping it down, now this low pitch has less acoustic energy. And to compensate for that, you're going to end up squeezing a bit more at the vocal folds. You're going to use muscle rather than acoustics to give the voice energy. And this is where most people tire out the voice.
I love hearing about the science behind like everyday things that we take for granted. And I mean, the voice, like you say, it's everyone takes it for granted, but it's one of those things we're all, it's just there, isn't it? It's like breathing almost. But the science behind it, it's really interesting to hear you explain that.
The science is incredibly complex, and it's a passion of mine. And it gets deep. It gets deep. But even vowels themselves, why do we hear vowels? Why do we hear ooh rather than oh? And people will think, well, I shape my mouth differently. But the fact is, it's actually vowels exist here in the mind. It's how we perceive pitch. And when you hear a siren go, wee woo, wee woo, there's nothing to make an E or an ooh in that siren. There are no lips or tongue. It is the frequency of the sound. We hear higher frequencies tend to have an E perception, and lower frequencies tend to have an ooh perception. And I know that's a complete tangent, but the acoustics of the voice are just fascinating.
Yeah, it does make you wonder where that line is between actual, like, observable physical fact and the mind's interpretation, doesn't it?
It is. Our mind's a filter, right? I mean, they think even our perception of reality is not true reality, that we need to make this construct out of whatever this is so we can function within it. And that's the other thing. As the mind is filtering, if you're using your voice in a way to constantly break through that filter, and so that the filter focuses on you, and again, that can come into pattern interrupt. When you start speaking in rote patterns, you're going to get filtered out. But when something's new and novel, the brain pays attention to it. That's part of it as well.
I don't want to get too metaphysical, but the one thing that always sticks in my brain is color, right?
Absolutely.
So we recognize color because we're taught what that color is as children. But does that mean that everyone sees it the same way? Or is it just that's how it looks to us and we've been told it's that color, so that's what we think it is?
Correct. And it's the way we're perceiving the speed of vibration.
Yeah.
And the same is with the voice. We're hearing the voice. It's the speed of these vibrating molecules that are creating these different experiences and colors. And so that I teach people to be able to start to access the fullness of their voice to create a more brilliant color spectrum. So they're not speaking on a grayscale, that they actually have the rainbow of colors available to them.
Pulling on that thread for too long, I might lose my mind. So let's move on. So what other advice would you give to an aspiring speaker or maybe a new leader who's struggling to engage with their team if they want to improve their ability to connect with their audience or people they work with or whoever it is that they're trying to communicate with?
It's emotional connection. It's human connection. And I will tell singers that I work with as we work on technique that this is not the highest level of singing. This is just a tool to get you to the highest level, which is connection. So if you're able to, when you have something, now this is not just talking, as you say, at the water cooler, but if you have something important and people are coming together and you truly need to be heard, it will really pay dividends to think about what your goals are, what your intentions are in having this talk, to get very clear about these intentions and to allow these intentions to really kind of sit and take root. This is what great actors do in a scene. They find intention. So don't just think something bland. Okay, I'm going to be excited. That doesn't work. Make your intention a goal. No, my intention is to inspire. My intention is to reveal. My intention is to warn. And then when you have that, you allow those emotional intentions to be expressed through the instrument of your voice and allow yourself to connect. Don't pull inward. Allow your energy to be outward. Make everything about others and they will feel that energy in you. We're social beings and those antennae are very, very sensitive. And when you're connecting on that level, you will be inspiring.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme here, isn't there, of being intentional about what you're doing.
When it counts, yes.
Yeah. What is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from your career so far?
At the risk of repeating myself, I have found that great leaders make it about others. And that when you said, what gets you out of bed in the morning? I really do, even though this might sound a little hokey, but it really is to help other people. And as soon as it becomes about me and I start worrying about me, then you fall into all those mental traps of comparing and all of those things. But when I make it about others, when I make it helping about others, that's where I feel that you can truly lead. And that's where people will want to follow, which is key.
Yes, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you there. I think putting the people first is, it's important for so many reasons. All the ones you've listed, but also for if you're going to succeed as a leader, you've got to hold the trust and respect of the people you're trying to lead. And you're not really going to get that if you're visibly putting yourself first. Certainly in my experience anyway.
And we felt that where we've been tricked by a charismatic leader. Look, we've had leaders or those above us who from the jump are unpleasant people. And you can see that. But it's the person with Machiavellian tendencies who almost con you. And then when you realize that you've been conned and it's really just somebody who's selfish and out for their own gain, that's when you really feel that trust is broken. And so, as I said, you have con artists and cult leaders who use these vocal, charismatic tools in order to emotionally manipulate. But when you use this to help people, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think there's the whole problem, isn't there, with charismatic leaders? And I mean, I'm probably biased or paranoid or both, but for me, I blame like the Hollywood film culture and the way they portray leaders. Because actually, charisma is okay, like it's the means to the end, isn't it? But it shouldn't be the only reason you perceive someone as a leader. And I think the risks there, and you mentioned the bad actors, the con men types, the cult leaders, dare I say, politicians.
Absolutely.
And there is the risk there, isn't there? I mean, there's some huge risks there in following that charismatic dictator, isn't there?
Yeah. And I think the word charisma, I think, is a broader word. Charisma doesn't have to be this vibrant, shiny thing that's on stage. Charisma can be in quieter moments. Charisma to me really is when you're connecting to people in an honest way and they feel that energy. They will just view you in a different way and you'll be able to inspire them. You don't have to have fireworks going off to inspire other people. You can do it very quietly, but it still works to the same effect because you are focused on others in an honest way.
Yes, it's the last bit that's most important, though, isn't it? I think following a leader solely because of their ability to persuade you or your perception of their charisma should be further down the list, I think, than what you think their intentions actually are. And
that's right.
Whether they care about you, whether you respect them as a leader, as a person, as a business owner, and so on. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Interesting problem.
Indeed.
What do you think has been the worst mistake you've ever seen a leader make?
Again, I think it's betraying the trust of people. When you think that they are one way and they talk a good game about caring about other people, and you realize that it really is just manipulation and it's ego, and it's look, narcissists and sociopaths do have skills in this area, and they are very gifted in telling people what they want to hear and manipulating them. But when that is discovered, it really is, it's a shattering of trust that can't be recovered. All leaders will make mistakes, but when they're honest and they're open about it, you can say that's okay. Even if it's a big mistake, you can say, you know what, that's okay. We're all human. But when it's manipulation, I think it's over.
Yeah, I think you're right. Try not to drop any names there, but certainly in my own experiences, that has been the case. Yes.
I'm sure we could all think of them. Yeah. And in the public sphere as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've promised myself I'm not going to talk as much about politics because it's too easy to just get into a big rant, isn't it? And especially with recent events, certainly in the UK anyway.
And here as well. It's interesting times.
Yeah.
Indeed.
What has been your personal best experience of being led?
That's a great question. It really is. I remember it's someone who is a real expert in voice science. And in my enthusiasm, I was teaching on some aspects of voice science, and I had some things wrong. That I was conflating the models a little bit, right? And of course, all models are imperfect, but some models are better than others. And he just came to me in just the most respectful but honest way and showed me where this was wrong. And I never felt chastised or threatened. And it actually was a wonderful educational experience that I was grateful for. And this person truly is a thought leader in this space, but maintains a humility that's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, humility is a word that comes up quite a lot when I ask that question, actually. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to know more about that interaction and what it was that he did that made you, well, that didn't make you feel like you were being picked on.
Yeah, he first of all, he respected how I got to my conclusion, and he understood it, and he said, "Look, but it's based on a model that really doesn't work anymore, that has since been discarded." And it was kind of a technical acoustics thing, but he said, "Look, no, it's functioning in this way." And he showed me some demonstrations, and it was just very eye-opening. And he just did it in a way that just didn't make me feel like an idiot because I had publicly said the other thing. And I wasn't the only person who had publicly said the other thing. But of course, we don't like to be wrong, and we don't like to be shown that we're wrong. And I have certainly experienced people who want to show you where you're wrong as a way to build themselves up and almost just pile drive and maybe feel superior. And that was not anywhere close to that. It really was just a very respectful conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really good. Yeah, we've all worked with people like that, haven't we? Of, you're wrong, I don't want to hear about it, and the end of conversation kind of person. But I think part of the power in that is the having the self-awareness actually to recognize it and for yourself to take on that constructive criticism, let's call it. Because again, a lot of people, a lot of managers, as you say, we don't like being wrong. So we react by digging our heels in and saying, no, I'm not wrong. I'm going to argue with it. So yeah. Sure.
And I'm sure you having a podcast, right? You're public facing. We will get criticisms sometimes, and they may be even on the troll-like level. But I will even look at troll type of comments that I get and go, okay, but let's drop the nastiness, right? And the attempt to wound. And is there something I can learn from here? Is there a truth here? Is there something I can be doing better? And oftentimes it's no, this is just somebody who has nothing better to do. But occasionally there are things where I go, no, you know what? That lands a little bit. I can see that point and to adjust from that.
Yeah, very occasionally there is value in there.
It is somewhat occasional, but I do try and look for it every time.
I guess for me, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the motives behind it. To a point, it almost doesn't matter whether there's a point in there, does it? Because the reason they're saying it is to cause harm. That's their intent with a troll anyway.
Correct. But sometimes with a troll, there may be others that are thinking the same thing, but they're not going to say it in quite the nasty way. And so, yeah, I have certainly done some things with my public facing content where I've made some adjustments, where, again, very rare, but I go, no, you know what? I actually see what's annoying that person. And if that's annoying him, it may be annoying a few others as well. And I can make that slight shift. But then there are others I just have to stop myself from writing a scathing response. If I do respond, I try and do it with humor, somewhat self-deprecating, or I just leave it alone.
Let's change topic again. We're straying towards politics at a dangerous rate of speed there. So if you could go back in time to the start of your career, what advice would you give your younger self? There's
a quote from John Wooden, who was a very famous basketball coach, college basketball coach here in the U.S. And he's very well known for his inspirational quotes. And I'm going to horribly paraphrase here, but he said, "It's what you learn after you know everything that's most important." And early in my career, when I was teaching and I was surrounded, I was taught within this group, this method of like-minded individuals. And we got a little bit on the high horse, and then everyone who wasn't with us was against us. And I realized that, no, this thing of thinking you have all the answers is wrong. And there's so much value, even if somebody is talking something that's 90% rubbish, there may be 10% of something to learn. And just being more open, knowing when to reject things. But I think I would have embraced more schools of knowledge earlier.
That actually reminds me of my own early career as well, particularly from the leadership point of view. There was a stage where the way I was initially taught leadership when I first learned about it was, you are the leader, therefore what you think and say is right and everything else is wrong. And that's exactly what you've described there. And we were talking before we hit the record button, we were discussing briefly Mr. Nixon. And it reminds me of that quote from the film Frost versus Nixon. I'm saying because I was president, because I did it, therefore it was right, and again, I've butchered the quote, but
yeah.
And it's such a flawed perception or understanding of leadership, and moving on from that and being open to learning, exactly as you say, and even if it's someone you disagree with, especially because it's someone you disagree with, sometimes you should seek out those opposing views, because you need to understand both sides of the story, really, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating. I believe those talks, Frost with Nixon, occurred at Nixon's home. And the reason that came up, I can basically see it from where I live, where those conversations took place.
Yeah, we don't just talk about presidents and former presidents.
No.
Yeah.
We didn't get on the call. What do you think about Nixon?
Yeah, we should make that clear to the listeners. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting parallel, though, and I guess a common thread again that quite a few early career managers will go through. So there we go.
Yeah, but look where it took Nixon, right? I mean, it eventually took him down, and I think those who use their powers not in the best way, when it becomes self-focused, they're, especially in today's environment, those that follow you are not going to put up with the shenanigans of days gone by. And I haven't spent a lot of time in the corporate world, because as a musician and then, an independent educator, but my wife certainly has. And she was in a very competitive space in radio here in Los Angeles. And just the things that she saw go on in her career absolutely wouldn't be tolerated today. So I think leaders really need to adjust for a new generation and a new world of thought. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, going back to Nixon again, but certainly leaders like him, I think where they went wrong is they were still thinking that way towards the end of their careers. Whereas certainly today, most managers will learn quite early on that that's the wrong way to go.
That is the wrong way. Absolutely.
Even back then, we talk about the modern manager and all of that, but even back then it was recognized pretty broadly that he did the wrong thing.
Well, certainly by the end, yes.
Leadership Heroes.
So last question for you, and this is always one of my favorite questions. I call it Leadership Heroes. And the question I'm going to ask you is this. If you had to pick one person, and they can be anyone you like, alive or dead, past, present, real, fictitious, depends how crazy you're feeling, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Well, for me, the person that I would choose has to have that communication element and that voice element. And names that would come to mind, someone like Winston Churchill, right? And again, politics aside, but in that moment of darkness was able to basically rally a country with his oratory skills. And Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, when you hear the "I Have a Dream" speech in your mind, you hear the way he said it. You hear the music in his voice. And might have to be Dr. King, just his skills of engaging and connecting and using emotion, and also the correctness and the righteousness of his stance. I think someone without his skill of speaking, I don't know if they would have been as effective, especially with the obstacles that he and his movement were up against.
I sit on the fence with this one because I think, yes, absolutely, he was clearly a great leader and totally recognised the power in his words and the way he delivered them. But at the same time, I don't like to view leadership as just giving a speech.
No, that is true.
I think it's about more than that, isn't it? You're right. And particularly in that circumstance. And I guess for him, he was kind of the perfect storm, wasn't he? Because as you say, he had the righteousness of the cause. He had the people behind him. He was inspirational to them. He had the vision of what he wanted to achieve and where he wanted to lead people. And he was an excellent speaker. So all of those things combined, I'm with you. If there's going to be a pick for perfect leader, he'd probably be high on my list as well.
You of course can lead. You're incredibly intelligent, you have the right ideas, etc. But an essential component is being heard and connecting to people. And of course, if you have this great voice and this great communication, but you're an empty suit, if you will, that's not great leadership. But if you have that desire, you have the ideas, you have the willingness and the ability to help people, I think the voice, because of the way it connects us as human beings, it's not absolutely essential, but it's pretty important. And I think in today's environment and competitive edge, it really is one of those things where your competition, if you will, may not be paying attention to this. And if you do, I believe it's a pretty solid edge.
Yeah, I'm finding it hard to disagree with you. Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the central core components of effective leadership is effective communication. And ultimately, there's only so much communication you can do via email, isn't there? You've got to use your voice at some point. So, yeah, I am with you there.
Well, ultimately, we're connecting with other human beings, and all of our emotions and just the capriciousness of our decision-making process and how emotion does play into that. And again, we've all felt manipulated and wondered how did that happen? But when it's used for good, when you really are a leader and you really have something to say, it's part of your toolkit, certainly.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, like, final thought, you mentioned emotion again. I think one of the worst leaders I've ever worked with, their go-to phrase was, I think we should just take the emotion out of it. In their head, they probably thought, I'm going to be logical and objective about leadership, and that's the way we're going to go. But
well, when all employees are AI, absolutely. But for now, it's messy human beings.
Yeah. Hopefully that won't happen in my lifetime. But there we go.
No, and then when it becomes self-aware, maybe it becomes emotional as well.
I don't know if that's comforting or terrifying. Well, John, it's been great talking with you today. Last thing I'm going to do, which I do for everyone at the end of the episode, is if the listeners would like to learn more about you or perhaps work with you, would you like to point them to website, book, podcast, all of the above?
Yeah, my main website is John Henny, JohnHenny.com. My website for speakers is compellingspeaker.com. And I also have a list of vocal warm-ups, quick ways to get your tired voice going again that you can download there. I do have a few books on singing available. My book for speakers, let me see, this morning I just crossed the 20,000 word mark. So I'm coming up on the first draft being done. So by the end of summer, that should be available as well. Don't have the working title, but if you look up John Henny on Amazon, it will pop up, hopefully by end of summer.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I look forward to that one. Awesome. And listeners, I'll put all of those details in the episode description as well, so you can find it all easily. John, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
John, thank you so much for that. Really enjoyable chat we had there, and hopefully we managed to thread the needle there and avoid politics too much. Listeners, if you would like to learn more about John and the work that he does, just a reminder, I have put his website details in the episode description for you, so you can find that easily. If you are a new or first-time manager and you're struggling to get the most from your team and you want to learn to be a better, more engaging, people-driven leader, then please do reach out to me. You can contact me on LinkedIn, or you can visit the website, sign up there, or hit the contact button. And that website and my LinkedIn details are in the episode description. Please do reach out. No obligation, no stress, no pressure. Let's just have a chat about leadership, because hopefully you can tell by now, I really enjoy talking about it. And that's it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you'll join me again next week. And in the meantime, be a leader, not a boss.